The galaxy was a place of endless battles where the strong thrived and the weak were crushed beneath the boots of the conquerors. It had always been this way, and it was never going to change. At least that's what the other species believed. They had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, each more confident than the last, until they were wiped away, forgotten in the tides of war. The Zoggoth Empire was no different, powerful, ruthless. They had dominated countless star systems. Their ships and soldiers feared across the stars. The Zoggoth had come to Earth to destroy humanity. A new species, fragile and young, they had no place in the galaxy's hierarchy. To the Zoggoth, humans were nothing more than a nuisance, an insect to be squashed beneath their heel. They had watched as the human colonies began to expand, carving out territories among the stars. At first, the Zoggoth ignored them. But then came the whispers. Humans were beginning to make waves. Humans were building a fleet. Humans had a warship. The Zoggoth Empire couldn't let that go unpunished. Not while their strength was unchallenged. The decision was made. Humanity had to be wiped out, eradicated before they could threaten the Zoggoth's reign. And so a massive Zoggoth armada, hundreds of ships strong, descended on the human colonies in the star systems nearest to Earth. The order was simple: destroy everything. Leave no survivors. On the other side of the galaxy, humanity was not prepared for the scale of the oncoming storm. Earth had been quiet for decades, its people focused on expanding into space, building their colonies, advancing their technology. They had no idea what they were about to face. But they had one thing the Zoggoth did not expect: a fierce, unyielding will to survive. The Pride of Terra, the largest and most powerful human warship ever built, had just finished its maiden voyage. It was a symbol of humanity's strength, a ship unlike any other in the galaxy. Its hull was forged from a mix of human ingenuity and the scraps of alien technology they had scavenged from across the stars. Every weapon, every piece of technology, every system was designed to do one thing: defeat the impossible. But the Zoggoth didn't know this. To them, it was just another ship in a fleet that would be obliterated by their overwhelming force. The Pride of Terra had been sent to the war zone to buy humanity time. The human colonies needed time to organize, to escape, to fight back. But there was no time for mercy. The Zoggoth were already here. On the bridge of the Pride of Terra, Captain Elijah Kane stood, her eyes scanning the view screen. She had fought on the front lines of war many times, leading soldiers through blood and fire, but this was different. This time, she was not leading a small group of soldiers. She was leading the entire fight for humanity's survival. She had one ship, one chance, and the weight of every human being in the galaxy was on her shoulders. "Captain, the Zoggoth fleet is on the move," said Lieutenant Jorvik, her tactical officer. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of tension in his words. The Zoggoth were huge, massive. Their ships were like floating fortresses, their numbers nearly overwhelming. "I see them," Elijah said quietly. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. The enemy fleet was coming in fast. Dozens of ships, all aimed directly at the colonies. Humanity's future was at stake. "We've received reports from the colonies," Jorvik continued, his voice steady despite the tension. "They're evacuating, but it's slow. The Zoggoth are too fast. They'll reach the colonies before we can get there." "Then we stop them here," Elijah said, her voice hard, unshakable. She wasn't about to let her people die without a fight. "We have to make them bleed." The Pride of Terra wasn't built for running. It wasn't built to hide in the shadows and avoid conflict. It was built to fight, built to win. "Sir, they're closing in on the human colonies," the comms officer reported urgently. "They've already begun firing on the outer defense stations. If we don't do something, it'll be too late." Elijah's hand gripped the edge of her chair. The decision was already made. There was no turning back now. "Raise shields, prepare weapons. We're going in," she commanded, her voice firm, unwavering. "We stop them here or we lose everything." The Pride of Terra powered up its massive engines and broke through the war zone, heading directly into the heart of the enemy fleet. The stars around them seemed to stretch as the ship moved faster than any of the Zoggoth ships had expected. "This is madness," said Lieutenant Jorvik. "We're outnumbered 10-1. "I don't care," Elijah shot back. "They can't kill us if we don't let them." The Zoggoth fleet was already firing. Massive energy blasts lit up the space around them, each shot a testament to the Zoggoth's firepower. The shields of the Pride of Terra flared as the first blast hit, the ship rocking under the impact. But Elijah had anticipated this. The Pride of Terra was designed to take a beating and keep going. "Target their lead ships," she commanded. "Lock on weapons and fire at will." The Pride of Terra unleashed its first salvo. The blast was unlike anything the Zogeth had ever seen. Plasma cannons, railguns, and laser arrays all fired in unison, a symphony of destruction. The first Zogath ship, a massive destroyer, didn't stand a chance. Its shields were overwhelmed in an instant, and the next moment it erupted into a ball of fire and metal. For a moment there was silence. Then the Zogath fleet reacted. They fired back, sending everything they had at the human ship. But the Pride of Terra was not deterred. The ship weaved between the blasts, taking more hits but never slowing down. Every time they hit, the ship's shields flared brightly, absorbing the impact before regenerating. The ship moved with a deadly grace, defying the Zogath's expectations. The Zogath were used to dominance. They were used to crushing their enemies effortlessly, but this was something different. The humans weren't retreating, they weren't begging for mercy, they were fighting, and they were winning. Captain Elijah Kane stood firm at the helm of her ship, eyes sharp, every move calculated. This was just the beginning. The Zogath had no idea what was coming for them. They thought they could crush humanity like they had crushed so many others. But humanity wasn't like the others. Humanity fought, and they would fight until the end. The Zogath fleet was massive. There were more ships than the eye could count, their black hulls gliding through space with terrifying purpose. Hundreds of destroyers, cruisers, and carriers, all filled with the best soldiers and the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. They had come to finish what they had started, to erase humanity from the stars. Captain Elijah Kane stood tall on the bridge of the Pride of Terra, her eyes focused on the war zone unfolding before her. The hum of the ship's systems was a constant presence in her ears, but her mind was laser-focused on the task ahead. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was not just a battle, it was the future of humanity itself. "Enemy fleet closing in, Captain," Lieutenant Jorvik said from his post, his voice tight with tension. "They're going to fire any second now." Elijah didn't flinch. She had seen this kind of thing before. She knew what the Zogath were capable of. What they didn't know was what the Pride of Terra could do. "Get us in close," Elijah ordered, her voice calm but filled with determination. "We're going straight through them, full speed." The ship's engines roared to life and the Pride of Terra surged forward, cutting through the void of space. The Zogath fleet was close now, too close, but that was exactly what Elijah wanted. She had always known the key to winning a battle wasn't just firepower, it was strategy. The Zogath had underestimated humanity, and she was going to make them regret it. "Shields up, all weapons ready," the tactical officer reported, his voice steady despite the growing danger. The first blast from the Zogath came out of nowhere. A huge pulse of energy shot toward the Pride of Terra, burning through space like a lightning bolt. It hit the ship's shields with a deafening crack. The ship lurched, the floor beneath the crew's feet trembling, but the shields held strong. Elijah barely registered the impact. Her focus never wavered. "Return fire," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. In an instant, the Pride of Terra unleashed its first barrage. Plasma cannons, railguns, and ion blasts filled the space, all converging on the lead Zogath destroyer. The ship's massive shield flickered as it absorbed the hits, but it was no match for the raw power of the human ship. In a flash, the shields failed, and the next blast ripped straight through the destroyer's hull. The Zogath ship exploded in a fiery ball of metal and flame, its debris scattering across the battlefield. For a moment, there was silence. The crew of the Pride of Terra stood still, the realization of what they had just done sinking in. "We did it," Jorvik breathed, but his words were cut short as the Zogath reacted. "They're coming at us fast," another officer shouted. Elijah's grip tightened on the armrests of her chair. The Zogath fleet wasn't going to retreat, not after losing one ship. They were going to hit back harder, they always did. "Brace for impact," Elijah ordered. And then all hell broke loose. The Zogath fleet opened fire, their weapons coming from all directions. The Pride of Terra rocked under the first wave of hits. Energy blasts, missiles, and railgun rounds slammed into the ship's shields, making the entire vessel shudder. For a split second, the shields flickered and dimmed as the strain of holding back the onslaught began to show. But the Pride of Terra was built to take punishment. Its shield systems flared back to life, replenishing their strength with every second that passed. The crew's training kicked in, working in perfect harmony, keeping the ship intact, keeping it moving forward. "Captain, we're surrounded," Jorvik called out, his voice tense. "They've got us in a pincer formation." Elijah didn't hesitate. Cut through the middle, full thrust now. The Pride of Terra surged forward, heading straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. The Zoggath had made a mistake. They thought they could trap the humans in a box, but Elysia was going to break out of it. The ship darted between the Zoggath ships, narrowly avoiding a missile barrage that exploded just behind them, sending a shockwave that rattled the ship. The Pride of Terra didn't slow down. It couldn't. If it stopped now, they would be done. It was a fight for survival, a fight where every second counted. "Target their cruisers," Elysia ordered, her voice sharp with authority. Her crew responded instantly. The weapon systems locked onto their targets, and in one fluid motion, the Pride of Terra unleashed a deadly volley of plasma blasts and missiles. The first cruiser exploded in a cloud of burning debris, its broken hull tumbling through space. But the Zoggath didn't back down. They came at them harder, faster. The Zoggath fleet's numbers were overwhelming, and the Pride of Terra couldn't keep up the relentless pace forever. More enemy ships appeared, closing in from all directions. "Captain, we've taken heavy damage to the starboard side," the engineer reported, his voice strained. "Shields at 45%. We need to fall back or we'll—" "No," Elysia snapped, cutting him off. "We don't retreat, we keep fighting." She could hear the pounding of her own heart, feel the tension in her body, but there was no room for fear. Not now. Not when the future of humanity was on the line. They had come this far, and they weren't about to stop. "Prepare for another attack," the communications officer yelled. "The Zoggath flagship is locking onto us." Elysia's mind raced. The flagship was the heart of the Zoggath fleet. If they didn't take it out, the rest of the fleet would fall in line behind it. They had to act fast. "Focus fire on the flagship," Elysia commanded. "We take it out, we take them all down." The Pride of Terra pivoted, its massive guns swiveling toward the flagship. The ship fired everything it had, plasma beams, railguns, and missiles, all aimed at the heart of the enemy fleet. The flagship's shields flared, holding against the onslaught for a moment, but the Pride of Terra didn't stop. It kept firing, again and again, until finally the shields collapsed and the first blast hit the flagship's core. The explosion was deafening. The flagship, once a symbol of Zoggath power, vanished in a ball of fire. The shockwave from the explosion rippled through the battlefield, sending shockwaves of destruction through the Zoggath ships closest to it. The Zoggath fleet faltered. For the first time, they seemed unsure. The humans had taken down their leader, their pride. The Zoggath's fear was palpable. Elysia stood still, staring at the view screen, the debris of the destroyed flagship floating in space. Her heart was racing, but she held her ground. This was only the beginning. The battle was far from over, but humanity had just sent a message the Zoggath would never forget. The aftermath of the Zoggath flagship's destruction was a moment of silence in the war zone. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The Pride of Terra, still surrounded by the remnants of the Zoggath fleet, drifted in the wake of the explosion. Captain Elysia Kane stood firm at the helm, her eyes fixed on the view screen. The battle was far from over, but humanity had just made its mark. For the first time, the Zoggath fleet hesitated. Elysia knew they would recover quickly. The Zoggath were relentless, their pride undiminished by the loss of one ship, no matter how significant it had been. She couldn't afford to let her crew believe they had won. Not yet. "Captain, the Zoggath are reorganizing," Lieutenant Jorvik reported, his voice tight. "They're regrouping to launch another wave." Elysia nodded without taking her eyes off the screen. "I know. Get us into position. We're not done yet." She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The Pride of Terra had taken hits, but it was still standing. Stronger than any of the Zoggath expected, its weapons still loaded, its shields still functioning. But it couldn't take much more. Elysia knew that. The Zoggath fleet was vast, and every minute that passed meant more ships arriving. A warning alarm blared. Elysia's heart skipped a beat. "Captain, the Zoggath reinforcements are arriving," the sensor officer called out. "They're bringing in their dreadnoughts." The word dreadnought hung in the air like a death sentence. These were the largest and most fearsome ships in the Zoggath fleet. Each one was a floating fortress, armed with enough firepower to obliterate entire colonies in a single strike. "We need to buy time for the rest of our fleet to arrive," Elysia said, her voice calm but filled with the weight of command. "We can't let them get close." She glanced over at the tactical screen. The Pride of Terra was in the center of a deadly storm, surrounded on all sides by the Zoggath. Their ships were moving in for the kill, but Elysia wasn't afraid. Fear had no place on the battlefield. "Prepare all weapons. We make our stand here," she ordered. The crew worked with practiced efficiency, each member moving without hesitation. The Pride of Terra's massive guns swung into place, aimed at the incoming dreadnoughts. The ship's weapons hummed with power, and Elijah could feel the energy coursing through the ship. They were ready. The Zoggath made their move. The dreadnoughts fired first, unleashing a volley of missiles and energy blasts, their weapons tearing through the void toward the Pride of Terra. The ship shuddered as the blasts hit its shields, the shields flickering but holding steady. "Shields at 60%, Captain," the engineer reported urgently. "We can't keep this up for long." "Then we finish them before they finish us," Elijah said through gritted teeth. The Pride of Terra moved into action. It surged forward, cutting through the hail of fire like a predator hunting its prey. The Zoggath dreadnoughts loomed ahead, massive and menacing, but the human warship was fast, too fast. It darted between the blasts, its hull absorbing the energy from the impacts but never slowing. "Target the lead dreadnought," Elijah commanded. "All weapons fire on my mark." The crew's hands flew over their stations, their movements swift and precise. The ship's weapons locked onto the lead dreadnought. The massive guns of the Pride of Terra came to life, unleashing a barrage of plasma, railgun fire, and missile salvos. The first blast hit the dreadnought's shields, and Elijah watched as they flickered and failed, unable to withstand the power of the human assault. The Pride of Terra didn't stop. The next shot hit the dreadnought's core, punching a hole straight through its hull. The ship erupted in a massive explosion, sending debris scattering across the battlefield. "Direct hit, one dreadnought down," the tactical officer cheered. But Elijah didn't celebrate. There were still more to fight, more to kill. The Zoggath were furious now. They weren't going to make this easy. They came at the Pride of Terra with a renewed fury, launching everything they had. "Captain, more ships incoming. They're flanking us on both sides," Jorvik yelled. Elijah cursed under her breath. The Zoggath weren't giving them a chance to breathe. The human warship was outnumbered, surrounded on all sides, and every ship in the Zoggath fleet seemed to want a piece of them. "We're not giving up," Elijah said firmly. "All hands brace for impact." The Pride of Terra twisted and turned, narrowly avoiding another missile barrage. The ship's shields flickered and flared as another wave of energy blasts hit. The Zoggath were relentless, and every hit pushed the ship closer to its limits. "Shields at 40%. We need to fall back, Captain," the engineer urged. "No," Elijah shouted. "We stand our ground." She glanced at the screen and her heart sank. The Zoggath weren't backing off. More dreadnoughts were coming, and the gap between their reinforcements and the human fleet was closing fast. The Pride of Terra was alone in the heart of the enemy formation, and it couldn't keep up the fight much longer. "Get the vanguard on the line," Elijah said, her voice steady. "Tell them to hurry, we need backup now." "Captain," a voice shouted from the sensor station. "The Zoggath flagship is moving into position. They're preparing to fire a planetary cannon." Elijah's eyes widened. The Zoggath flagship carried a weapon capable of obliterating entire planets. If they used it on the Pride of Terra, it would be the end of the fight. It would be the end of humanity. "Not on my watch," Elijah muttered under her breath. With a roar, the Pride of Terra surged forward once again, charging straight at the Zoggath flagship. The crew held their breath as the ship raced toward the massive vessel, the energy weapon powering up, its barrel glowing ominously. "Fire everything we have," Elijah ordered, "now." The Pride of Terra opened fire with every weapon at its disposal. The railguns, the plasma cannons, the missile pods, all of it. The blasts tore through the void, slamming into the flagship's shields with a ferocity that shook the ship. The Zoggath flagship staggered, its shields barely holding, but the human ship didn't stop. "Captain, we're too close. We need to pull back," Jorvik shouted. "No," Elijah said, her voice firm. "We end this now." The final shot rang out. The Pride of Terra fired a massive plasma beam straight at the Zoggath flagship's core. The beam slammed into the heart of the enemy ship, and for a moment everything went silent. The Zoggath flagship's shields shattered and the core detonated. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, sending shockwaves rippling through the battlefield. The Zoggath fleet faltered. The final blow had been struck. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then the human warship's crew erupted into cheers. They had done it. The Zoggath flagship was gone, and with it, their hope of winning. Elijah allowed herself a brief smile, but there was no time to celebrate. The battle wasn't over, not yet. The explosion of the Zoggath flagship had shattered the enemy's momentum. For a moment, the battlefield hung in a tense, breathless silence. The Zoggath fleet had been decimated by the destruction of their command ship, but they were far from finished. Their remaining ships, dreadnoughts, cruisers, and destroyers, still filled the void of space, their dark forms surrounding the Pride of Terra like vultures waiting for their prey to weaken. Captain Elijah Kane stood at the helm of the Pride of Terra, her eyes sharp and calculating, every part of her mind focused on the war zone ahead. She had commanded soldiers through hell and back, had led them in battles where survival was the only victory. But this was different. This wasn't just about winning. This was about sending a message, one that would echo across the stars, and the Zoggath were going to hear it loud and clear. "Captain, their forces are regrouping," Lieutenant Jorvik reported, his voice laced with tension. "They've formed a tight formation. They're preparing for a counteroffensive." Elijah's gaze remained fixed on the view screen, her hands steady on the command console. The Pride of Terra had already taken a beating, but it was far from out of the fight. She had a crew that believed in her, a ship that could take what the enemy threw at it and keep moving forward. But even that wasn't enough. She needed to end this, before the Zoggath could rally, before reinforcements arrived, before they could retaliate with full force. "Get us into position," she ordered, her voice calm but firm. "We push through, we don't stop." The Pride of Terra shifted, its massive engines roaring to life as it accelerated toward the heart of the Zoggath fleet. The crew moved quickly, their movements seamless, a well-oiled machine under the captain's command. The tension on the bridge was palpable, but there was no fear in their eyes, just resolve. They had already fought through impossible odds and come out on top, and now they were going to finish what they had started. "We can't afford to hold back," Elijah muttered to herself. Her eyes flickered over the tactical screen, analyzing the positions of the Zoggath ships. "Prepare for close-range engagement." "We've sustained significant damage, Captain," the engineer said, his voice strained. "Shields are at 35%. We're going to need time to repair." Elijah's jaw tightened. Time wasn't something they had. They were in the middle of the enemy fleet, surrounded on all sides, and the Pride of Terra wasn't built to be passive. It was built to fight, and fight they would. "Do what you can, but we're not stopping," she said, cutting him off. "We push forward, shields or no shields, weapons ready to fire." The battle around them raged on, but the Zoggath were beginning to regroup, pulling themselves into a formation that could overwhelm the Pride of Terra if they attacked in unison. But the humans had something the Zoggath didn't: strategy. The Zoggath believed in their raw power and their massive numbers. They had been used to crushing their enemies under the weight of their ships. But humanity wasn't like the others. The humans fought smarter, not harder. The Pride of Terra tore through the void, weaving between incoming fire and launching deadly counterattacks. The Zoggath ships fired, but the human warship was faster, more agile than they had ever expected. Energy blasts and missiles passed inches from the hull, but the Pride of Terra danced through the chaos with deadly grace. "Target the lead cruiser," Elijah commanded, her voice as sharp as ever. "All weapons fire." The ship's weapons erupted in unison, a symphony of destruction that rained down on the Zoggath ship. The first blast hit the cruiser's shields, then another hit the hull. The ship shuddered under the onslaught, but the Pride of Terra didn't stop. It fired again and again, until the cruiser finally broke apart in a massive explosion. "We've taken out their front line," the tactical officer reported, a note of triumph in his voice. "We're breaking through." But the Zoggath were relentless. Their ships swarmed like angry hornets, circling the Pride of Terra in an attempt to close in from every side. The enemy ships came in waves, launching everything they had, their weapons flashing like deadly stars. The Pride of Terra was being hammered, its shields flickering under the constant barrage of fire. "Shields at 15%, the engineer yelled. "We need to get out of here, Captain." Elijah didn't flinch. She wasn't about to retreat, not now, not after everything they had fought for. Humanity had never been one to run from a fight. "Hold fast," Elijah shouted. "All hands brace for impact." The Pride of Terra surged forward once more, pushing through the incoming fire, its weapons never relenting. The enemy ships were close now, too close. The Zoggath tried to corner the human warship, but Elijah had other plans. "Take us in," she ordered. "We're going through their formation, close-range attack." The Pride of Terra shot forward at breakneck speed, breaking through the Zoggath's defenses like a blade through flesh. The ship's weapons ripped through Zoggath ships, each blast devastating their ranks. The Pride of Terra was a juggernaut, unstoppable in its fury, its firepower unmatched. The Zogeth fleet was falling apart, one ship at a time. "Captain, we've taken out half their fleet," Jorvik reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "They're retreating." Elijah's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the battle turning in their favor, but they weren't finished yet. The Zogeth had been humiliated, but they would never give up without a fight. "Stay on them," she commanded. "We don't stop until every last one of them is gone." The Zogeth ships were now in disarray. The survivors, those who had once believed in their invincibility, were retreating in chaos. The human warship was too strong, too relentless, and as the Pride of Terra cut through their ranks, one final explosion lit up the void of space. A massive Zogeth destroyer, once a symbol of their empire's power, was torn apart in a brilliant flash. The Zogeth fleet was broken, their forces were scattered, and now they were running. Elijah stood tall at the helm, her chest rising and falling with every breath, but her mind was clear. The battle had been won, but she knew it wasn't just about the victory, it was about the message it sent. The Zogeth had underestimated humanity. They thought they could crush them with sheer force, but they were wrong. The Pride of Terra had proven that humanity could face impossible odds and still come out on top. And now, the galaxy would know. They would fear humanity, not for their numbers, but for their strength, their resolve, and their unbreakable will to survive. "Message sent," Elijah muttered under her breath, watching as the last remnants of the Zogeth fleet disappeared into the void. The galaxy would never be the same. The war zone was silent now. The rumble of battle had faded into an eerie quiet. The Pride of Terra hung in the center of it all, a lone giant amidst the wreckage of a shattered enemy fleet. Debris floated in space, the remnants of the Zogeth armada that had once seemed unstoppable. Now they were nothing but broken ships and twisted metal. Captain Elijah Kane stood at the helm, her eyes still fixed on the viewscreen. The Zogeth had been crushed. The flagship was gone. The remaining fleet had scattered, retreating into the depths of space, their pride shattered. But as the adrenaline slowly faded from her veins, a gnawing sense of unease settled in her gut. She couldn't let herself relax, not yet. "Captain," Lieutenant Jorvik said, his voice low but urgent. "We've received a transmission from the Zogeth command. They're asking for terms of surrender." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure whether to be relieved or suspicious. The Zogeth had always been ruthless conquerors. The thought of them surrendering seemed almost impossible. "Put it through," she said, her voice tight with anticipation. The screen flickered, and an image of a Zogeth officer appeared. He was a towering figure, with dark, segmented armor and glowing yellow eyes that glared at the screen. His mandibles clicked nervously as he spoke. "This is General Kraz of the Zogeth Empire. We offer terms of surrender. We will withdraw our forces from human space. In exchange, we request safe passage for the remnants of our fleet." Elijah's gaze hardened. The audacity of it all. They had just tried to annihilate humanity, and now they wanted mercy? They thought they could beg their way out of this, but Elijah knew that no amount of pleading could undo the devastation they had caused. They had killed countless lives, destroyed entire colonies, and forced humanity to fight for survival. She wasn't about to let them walk away scot-free. "We don't want your surrender," Elijah said, her voice cold and unyielding. "We want your complete retreat. Leave our space, now." Kraz's yellow eyes narrowed, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "You have no idea what you've done. The Zogeth Empire will not forgive this. You may have won today, but we will return. We will not rest until humanity is wiped from the stars." Elijah's jaw clenched. The Zogeth were a proud and dangerous race, but they were also blind. Blind to the reality that they had just lost everything. "We'll be ready," she replied, her tone filled with resolve. "And if you come back, we'll make sure you regret it." Without another word, she cut the transmission. The bridge was silent as the crew processed what had just been said. The Zogeth, beaten and broken, still believed they could come back for revenge. It was a dangerous mindset. Elijah couldn't let her guard down, not now, not ever. But at the same time, there was a glimmer of something in her chest, something that wasn't fear or anger. It was hope. The Zogeth had underestimated them, and now they knew better. "Captain, what are your orders?" Jorvik asked, his eyes focused on her. Elijah straightened, her voice calm and authoritative. "We continue the fight, we secure our space, and we prepare. If the Zogeth want to come back, they'll find humanity ready for war." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The Pride of Terra moved into position to patrol the human colonies, ensuring that no more Zoggoth forces would slip through the cracks. The rest of humanity's fleet, though still outnumbered, had gathered and was holding the line. Their victory had been hard-won, but it wasn't the end, not by a long shot. Elijah spent most of the time in the command center, working with her officers to organize the fleet's next steps. The tension on the bridge was thick. Everyone knew that a second wave of Zoggoth could be coming at any moment. The crew, though tired, was filled with a quiet determination. They had faced the impossible, and they had won. But the cost of victory was high. Too high, perhaps. Elijah couldn't stop thinking about the human lives that had been lost during the battle, the colonies that had been destroyed, the families who would never see their loved ones again. She had led them into this fight, and she had to make sure that their sacrifices were not in vain. "Captain, we've detected a new fleet approaching," Jorvik said suddenly, his voice tense. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing at the tactical display. The readings on the screen were clear. An entire armada of Zoggoth warships, far larger than the previous fleet, was moving in fast. It was a full-scale assault. The Zoggoth were coming for humanity's last stand. "How long until they arrive?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "At the current speed, they'll reach us in 2 hours," Jorvik replied. "They're bringing everything. This is their final push." The stakes had just gotten higher. The Zoggoth weren't backing down. They were coming back stronger than ever. But humanity wasn't going to be intimidated, not after everything they had already been through. "Prepare the fleet for battle," Elijah commanded. "We won't let them take another inch of our space. Set course for the incoming fleet, all weapons at the ready." The crew moved swiftly, coordinating with other human vessels, locking in their positions and arming their weapons. The tension in the air was electric as they prepared for what was about to come. Elijah could feel her pulse quicken as she mentally ran through their strategies. The Pride of Terra was ready. Its weapons systems were primed, its shields reinforced, and its crew loyal. But even as her heart pounded with the anticipation of the fight, she couldn't shake the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. If they failed, humanity's dream of a future among the stars would end. But if they succeeded, if they defeated this final wave, the Zoggoth would never again question the strength of humankind. "Captain," Jorvik said, his voice urgent once more, "we're receiving a message from the Vanguard. They're requesting permission to launch an assault on the Zoggoth fleet from the rear." Elijah's eyes flickered with approval. The Vanguard was one of humanity's most advanced ships, and its crew was more than capable of carrying out such a mission. "Give them the green light," Elijah replied. "Tell them to stay in contact. We need to know everything." "Understood, Captain." As the battle preparations continued, Elijah turned her gaze toward the stars outside the bridge's window. She had been part of humanity's struggle from the very beginning. She had seen the best and worst of her people. But now, looking out at the vastness of space, she realized just how much they had accomplished. The Zoggoth had underestimated humanity. They had come to conquer, to wipe them out. But humanity had fought back, and they weren't done yet, not by a long shot. "Ready yourselves?" Elijah said, her voice steady and filled with resolve. "This is it. We either stand and fight or we fall, but today we fight." The silence of the war zone was deafening, a stillness that seemed to stretch for miles, broken only by the faint hum of the Pride of Terra's engines as it prepared for battle. Captain Elijah Kane stood at the helm, her eyes narrowed at the tactical display. The Zoggoth armada was coming. This time they weren't just a few ships. This was a full-scale invasion. The entire fleet of humanity had gathered, a last stand in the making. Ships of every size, from the towering battleships to smaller, more nimble vessels, were lined up in a desperate formation. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If humanity fell now, it would be the end. The Zoggoth wouldn't just destroy them, they would erase them from history. Elijah could feel the weight of it all, heavy on her chest, but she couldn't afford to show weakness. Her crew needed her to lead. They had already faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, but this battle, it would determine whether humanity would live to fight another day or be wiped out. "Captain," Lieutenant Jorvik said, his voice tight with urgency, "Zoggoth ships are entering the system. They're coming in fast. We'll have them in range in 30 minutes. Elijah didn't flinch. She had prepared for this. The human fleet had regrouped, strengthened by their victory over the first wave. The Pride of Terra had already proven its power, but this fight would push them all to their limits. "Status of our fleet," Elijah asked, her voice calm despite the pressure building in her mind. The vanguard is in position, Jorvik replied. All ships are ready for combat. We've also received word from the outer colonies. They're ready to provide reinforcements if needed. Elijah nodded, her eyes shifting between the view screen and the tactical readouts. Every decision she made now would have a ripple effect. If they failed, there would be no second chances, no more retreats, no more survivors. Good, she said, her voice firm. We fight no matter the odds. The Zoggoth were relentless. They had never given up, and Elijah knew they wouldn't now. This final wave was their chance to avenge their loss, to reclaim their pride. But what they didn't know was that humanity had something they didn't, a reason to fight, to survive, to win. The enemy fleet came into view, a massive wall of ships, their dark forms blocking out the stars behind them. Elijah's pulse quickened. They were close now. She could feel the tension on the bridge, the silence of the crew as they prepared for the battle of their lives. Shields at maximum, Elijah ordered, her voice cutting through the thick air. Weapons ready. The Pride of Terra rumbled beneath her feet as its weapons systems powered up. The ship's massive guns hummed with deadly energy, the ship's rails glowing faintly, awaiting her command. Captain, Jorvik said, his voice steady despite the situation. We've got multiple incoming signals. They're spreading out, trying to flank us. Elijah's eyes darted across the screen. The Zoggoth had learned from their previous defeat. They were coming in with a coordinated attack, spreading their ships across the battlefield to overwhelm humanity's defenses. But they hadn't counted on the resilience of the human fleet. Bring us closer, Elijah ordered, her voice unwavering. We don't give them room to maneuver. The Pride of Terra surged forward, its engines roaring as it closed the distance between itself and the enemy fleet. The ship's hull groaned under the strain, but it held strong, cutting through the chaos like a blade through flesh. The Zoggoth opened fire. Waves of energy blasts and missiles streaked toward the Pride of Terra, hitting the ship's shields with brutal force. The shields flared brightly, absorbing the impact, but the force of the blasts shook the ship. Shields at 40%, the engineer reported urgently. We're holding, but not for long. Focus fire on their lead ships, Elijah commanded. Target their weapons systems first. We can't afford to be outgunned. The crew responded without hesitation. The Pride of Terra's weapons unleashed their fury, plasma cannons and railguns tearing through the Zoggoth formation. The first wave of enemy ships exploded in flashes of fire and debris, but the Zoggoth didn't relent. They came at them harder, faster, more determined than before. The Pride of Terra weaved between the blasts, dodging incoming missiles and energy beams with deadly precision. The ship's shields flared and dimmed with each impact, but the ship held steady. It was built to take punishment, built to fight back. Keep firing, Elijah shouted, her voice cold with determination. We're not backing down. Another enemy dreadnought appeared on the screen, its massive weapons charging up for a devastating shot. Elijah's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. She knew what had to be done. Target their dreadnought, she ordered. All weapons fire. The Pride of Terra fired its weapons in unison, the blast from the plasma cannon hitting the dreadnought's shields with a deafening roar. The shields flared, crackling with energy, but the Pride of Terra didn't stop. The next volley hit the dreadnought's hull, tearing through the massive ship's defenses. The dreadnought shuddered and groaned as its core began to destabilize, and with one final blast it exploded, sending a shockwave rippling through the battlefield. Direct hit dreadnought down, Jorvik shouted. The Zoggoth fleet hesitated for a moment, and in that brief instant, humanity's fleet seized the advantage. The vanguard launched its assault from the rear, catching the Zoggoth off guard. Smaller human ships darted between the larger Zoggoth vessels, their missiles finding their targets with deadly accuracy. The Zoggoth forces began to falter, their once coordinated attack now descending into chaos. The Pride of Terra was still at the center of the fight, relentless, cutting through the enemy ships like a hot knife through butter. The Zoggoth had never seen anything like this before. They had underestimated humanity once, and now they were paying the price. But the Zoggoth weren't finished. They launched another wave of attacks, their desperation apparent in every move they made. The Pride of Terra and humanity's fleet fought back with everything they had, each ship in the fleet pushing its limits. Captain, Jorvik said, his voice strained. We've got another wave coming in, and this time it's the full force. Elijah's jaw clenched. The Zoggoth were throwing everything they had left at them, but humanity was ready. She would not let them take another inch. Not now. "All ships form up," she ordered, her voice steady but filled with the fire of leadership. "We finish this here, now." The Pride of Terra surged forward once more, its weapons lighting up the darkness of space. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting to show the galaxy that they were a force to be reckoned with. The Zoggoth had come to destroy them. But in the end, it would be humanity who would deliver the final blow. The war zone had become a chaotic battlefield. The once dominant Zoggoth fleet, now broken and scattered, was fighting to regroup in the face of an enemy they never expected to encounter. Humanity. The Pride of Terra, still standing tall and unwavering amidst the carnage, had proven itself as a symbol of resilience, of defiance. Elijah Kane stood at the helm, her eyes locked onto the tactical display in front of her. The Zoggoth fleet was fractured, their once powerful ships now struggling to hold their ground against the relentless human assault. The Pride of Terra was battered, its shields flickering at only 25%, but it was still standing. And for the first time, it was the Zoggoth who were running out of options. The battle had been brutal. Waves of Zoggoth ships had come at them in succession, each time stronger, angrier, more determined. But with every wave, the Pride of Terra had struck back harder, faster, and with more precision than the Zoggoth could have ever predicted. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were winning. "Captain," Jorvik's voice broke through the tension on the bridge. "We've got multiple ships breaking off from the main fleet. They're retreating." Elijah didn't allow herself to show relief, not yet. She knew the Zoggoth well. A retreat could mean regrouping, a new strategy, or worse, a final, desperate assault. But the fact that they were retreating meant something significant. It meant the Zoggoth had lost their nerve. "Don't let them get away," Elijah commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "We finish this now." The Pride of Terra surged forward once more, its engines roaring as it cut through the black void of space, pushing through the disorganized Zoggoth fleet. The Zoggoth ships, once coordinated and confident, were now fragmented, struggling to keep up with the relentless assault. Their morale was shattered. The humans had sent a message that no one would forget. "Captain," the communications officer said urgently, "we've intercepted a message from Zoggoth Command. They're requesting a ceasefire." Elijah froze for a moment, the request echoing in her mind. The Zoggoth had never begged for mercy before. To hear them ask for a ceasefire was a bitter victory, a testament to their failure. But it was a victory nonetheless. "Put it through," Elijah said, her voice low and commanding. A new transmission flickered on the view screen, and once again the image of General Kraz appeared. This time, however, his arrogance was gone, replaced by a sense of defeat that Elijah could see in his eyes. You've won," Kraz said, his mandibles clicking nervously. "We request terms of surrender. Our forces are in disarray. We can't continue this war." Elijah stood silently for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision before her. The Zoggoth had come to conquer, to annihilate humanity. Now they were on their knees, begging for peace. But there was no honor in surrendering to those who had sought to destroy them. Humanity had proven its strength, and that strength demanded respect. "Tell them this," Elijah said, her voice filled with quiet authority. "We don't negotiate with those who came to kill us. Leave our space, now, and never return." The silence on the other end of the transmission was deafening. Kraz's eyes flickered with a mixture of disbelief and fear. He had thought humanity would crumble, that they would beg for mercy. Instead, they had crushed his fleet, humiliated his empire. "We understand," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "We will withdraw for now." Elijah cut the transmission without another word. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. Humanity had won, not just this battle, but a new place in the galaxy. The Zoggoth Empire had underestimated them, and now they had learned the price of that mistake. The next few hours were filled with a mixture of activity and reflection. The remnants of the Zoggoth fleet were retreating, heading back into the depths of space, their pride shattered. The Pride of Terra and the rest of the human fleet took up positions to secure the region, ensuring no Zoggoth ship would dare to return. Elijah stood on the bridge, looking out at the remains of the Zoggoth fleet. The stars beyond seemed so distant, almost unreachable, yet now they felt within humanity's grasp. They had proven themselves, and now the galaxy would know their name, humanity. "Captain," Jorvik said, his voice a bit softer now, "we've done it. They're retreating. We've won." Elijah didn't immediately respond. She stood tall, feeling the weight of the moment, the relief and the sorrow, the pride and the loss. The battle had been won, but the cost had been high. Too high. "I know," she said quietly, "but there's still more to do. The war might be over, but the fight for our place in this galaxy has just begun." She turned to face her crew. "We've shown the galaxy what we're made of. The Zoggoth thought they could wipe us out. They were wrong. And now every species out there knows one thing: humanity isn't just a force to be reckoned with. We're a force that will be reckoned with. And if anyone dares to challenge us again, they'll learn the same lesson the Zoggoth learned today." The bridge fell silent, the crew absorbing her words. Their expressions were filled with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. They had fought with everything they had, and now they had emerged victorious. In the days that followed, the human fleet held the line in the war zone, pushing back any lingering Zoggoth forces that dared to enter their space. Humanity's colonies were secured, and the threat of annihilation had passed. But there was no time to relax. There was still work to be done. The Pride of Terra, its mission complete, prepared for its journey back to Earth, where the news of humanity's victory would spread across the stars. It was the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one where they were no longer the underdogs, no longer the helpless species struggling to survive. Elijah stood once again at the helm of the Pride of Terra, looking out at the stars, her eyes filled with determination. The galaxy was vast, and humanity's place in it had just been earned. They had sent a message to every species out there: humanity will fight for its future, and we will not be afraid. "Captain," Jorvik said softly from behind her, "what's next for us?" Elijah smiled faintly, her gaze never leaving the endless stars. "We rebuild, we grow, and we make sure that the Zoggoth, or anyone else, never forgets the lesson they learned today." She turned to face her crew, her voice strong and filled with conviction. "The galaxy is ours now, and we're just getting started."